It started with an email. Not some grand revelation or dramatic confrontation. Just an innocuous little ping on my phone while I was in line for coffee. I almost ignored it. The sender's name didn't even register. Anonymous Tip 90. Who opens stuff like that? But boredom got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was staring at a single sentence that blew my life apart. Check your wife's messages with Tyler. Tyler, my best friend since college. We'd shared dorms, bar tabs, and secrets that would make priests blush. He was at my wedding, for God's sake, grinning ear to ear as he handed me the ring. The rest of the day was a blur. I'd like to say I stayed calm, that I kept my wits about me, but no. I spent hours spiraling, replaying every interaction, every glance, every casual laugh between the two of them. It wasn't until midnight that I finally worked up the nerve to look. My wife, Rachel, was asleep next to me, her face serene and oblivious. My hands shook as I unlocked her phone. It didn't take long to find the messages. They weren't hidden, no secret apps, no clever code words. Just a simple thread like they didn't even care if I found it. The texts weren't graphic. At first. Flirty banter, inside jokes I wasn't part of. Then pictures. Nothing explicit, but intimate in a way that made my stomach churn. A selfie of Tyler with my dog. A shot of Rachel in the dress she wore on our last date night. I'll spare you the details of what followed. Screaming. Accusations. Rachel crying, saying it wasn't what it looked like. Tyler's silence when I confronted him. Not denial, not an apology, just silence. That was worse than anything. He didn't even have the decency to lie. I moved out the next day, crashing at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It was a dive, but it gave me space to think. Or at least that's what I told myself. Mostly I just stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. When did Rachel and Tyler cross that line? Was it months ago? Years? Had I been a joke to them the entire time? Then the second email came. Asterisk, you deserve the truth. Meet me at 742 Elm Street. Asterisk.
No signature. No explanation.
Just an address. Common sense told me to ignore it, but common sense had been in short supply lately. So I went. 742 Elm turned out to be an abandoned warehouse. The kind of place you'd see in a bad crime movie. The door creaked open under my touch, and I stepped into the dim, cavernous space. It smelled like mildew and regret. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak pool of light on a folding table. And on that table, a file. Thick, worn, with my name scrawled across the front. Inside were pictures. Of Rachel, of Tyler, of me. Some were innocent shots from our wedding parties, holidays. But others were taken from angles that shouldn't have been possible. From inside our home, through windows from the corner of our bedroom. My stomach dropped. Someone had been watching us. At the bottom of the file was a USB drive. Against my better judgment, I took it back to the motel and plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, then a video began to play. It was grainy, black and white footage from what looked like a hidden camera. Rachel and Tyler were in the frame, sitting at my kitchen table. She was crying and he was laughing. Not the carefree laugh I'd known for years, but something cruel, mocking. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear. She flinched but didn't pull away. The video cut out. By the time it ended, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too simple, too clean. What I felt was something deeper, darker. A hollow rage that made my hands steady and my mind sharp. I started digging. Tyler had secrets. So did Rachel. Things I'd overlooked in the haze of trust and love. Bank statements that didn't add up. Late-night phone calls she claimed were work-related. And Tyler? He wasn't the struggling artist he'd pretended to be. He had money, a lot of it, from sources that didn't quite make sense. The more I uncovered, the less it seemed like an affair and the more it looked like something deliberate, coordinated, planned, like I was the mark in some elaborate con. The third email confirmed it. Asterisk, they're setting you up. Don't trust anyone. Asterisk. It was signed this time. A friend. What followed was a week of chaos. I won't bore you with the details, but it involved fake identities, offshore accounts, and a trail that led straight to a corporation I'd never heard of but was apparently listed as CEO for. A corporation tied to fraudulent loans, shady deals, and a mountain of debt. They weren't just betraying me. They were ruining me. But here's the thing about betrayal. It sharpens you. Makes you see things you'd ignored before. Weaknesses. Vulnerabilities. And Tyler? He had plenty. I won't say how I did it. Let's just say that by the time I was done, Tyler's carefully constructed life was in shambles. Rachel's too. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, gone. They'd taken everything from me, so I returned the favor. And then I disappeared. Now I'm somewhere far away. A place they'll never find me. I've got a new name, a new life, and enough dirt to make sure they never recover. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. If the emptiness I feel now is any better than the betrayal that filled it before. But then I remember the look on Tyler's face when he realized what I'd done. The way Rachel's voice broke when she begged me to stop. And I smile. It should have ended there. But life has a way of pulling you back into the muck. A few months into my new life, I got another email. No subject line, no sender name. Just a single attachment. A video file. Against every instinct, I opened it. The footage was recent. Tyler sitting in what looked like an interrogation room. His face was bruised, his clothes disheveled. Across the table sat a man in a crisp suit, his expression unreadable. Tyler was talking, his voice frantic and pleading. He kept saying my name. I don't know where he is, Tyler said, his voice cracking. I swear to God, I don't. But if I find him, I'll bring him to you. Just don't hurt me. The man in the suit leaned back, folding his hands. You've caused quite a mess, Mr. Hayes. Cleaning it up will be expensive. We expect payment. I don't have it, Tyler stammered. It's all gone. He took everything. The man's expression didn't change. He stood, adjusted his tie, and walked out of frame. A moment later, two large men entered. Tyler's screams were cut off as the video ended. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And now I'm the one being hunted. The emails kept coming. Each one darker, more cryptic than the last. Pictures of my new apartment, snapshots of me walking to the corner store, timestamps that told me they weren't just watching, they were close. I moved again, changed my name, my appearance, everything. But no matter how far I ran, they always found me. I started sleeping with a gun under my pillow, my body taut with the kind of tension that never fades. Paranoia became my closest companion. One night, as I sat in a dingy motel room halfway across the country, my phone buzzed with another email. This one was different. It had no text, no images, just a single GPS coordinate. My blood ran cold. I debated ignoring it, but something told me that wouldn't work. They wanted me there, and they wouldn't stop until I complied. So I packed my things, checked out of the motel, and drove through the night. The location led me to an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of a sprawling field. The air was thick with the scent of rain and decay. Inside, I found another file. This one was smaller, but its contents were devastating. Bank statements, incriminating emails, and forged documents, all tied to me. The trap was airtight. They'd built a case so solid that if it went to the authorities, I'd be behind bars for life. But that wasn't the worst part. The final page of the file was a contract. My name was scrawled at the bottom, right next to the words "in exchange for his cooperation." It was dated months before I'd even discovered Rachel's betrayal. This wasn't just revenge. This had been planned from the start. My phone buzzed again. A text this time, from an unknown number. Asterisk time's up. Choose a side. Asterisk. The choice. I froze as the text burned into my mind. Choose a side. What side? Whose side? The words swirled in my head as I sat in the dim light of the farmhouse. The weight of the file pressing on my lap like a leaden anchor. They had cornered me. Whoever they were, they had played me like a pawn in their cruel game, and now I was out of moves. The next step had to be precise. I couldn't afford to act out of desperation, though the adrenaline coursing through my veins begged for impulsiveness. I carefully tucked the file into my bag and slipped out of the farmhouse. The field stretched into an inky abyss, the silence broken only by the rustling of wind and the occasional hoot of an owl. My car was parked a good quarter-mile away, concealed by the trees. I kept low, every muscle in my body taut, straining to catch any sound of movement. When I reached the car, I checked it thoroughly. Under the chassis, in the wheel wells, even under the seats. Nothing.
No trackers, no explosives.
But the absence of evidence didn't comfort me. It only deepened my paranoia. Whoever was after me was too good to leave anything obvious. I drove to the nearest city, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The destination didn't matter. I just needed people around me. Crowds. Witnesses. A place where vanishing wasn't as simple as a bullet in the dark. By dawn, I had found a seedy motel in the heart of the city, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the cameras hadn't worked in decades. I barricaded the door with a chair and collapsed onto the bed. The file spread out before me like a dark prophecy. Every detail screamed of manipulation, of betrayal that ran deeper than Rachel and Tyler. This wasn't about an affair. This was about power, control, and erasure. Someone wanted me to disappear. Not just physically, but as a person. The phone buzzed again. You're running out of time. My heart thudded in my chest. The sender had no name, no number, just the same ghostly anonymity that had haunted me for weeks. I typed a reply, my fingers trembling. Asterisk, who are you? What do you want? Asterisk. The response came almost immediately. You already know. My mind raced. Did I? The pieces felt scattered, like fragments of a shattered mirror, each reflecting a different version of my life. The corporation, the offshore accounts, the betrayal, and that contract. My name inked at the bottom, months before my world had imploded. The next message came before I could formulate another reply. Asterisk, meet us. No more games. Asterisk. Attached was another coordinate. This time, a location in the industrial district on the outskirts of the city. My gut twisted. This was it. The end game. If I didn't go, they'd come for me. If I did go, there was no guarantee I'd leave alive. I spent the next hour preparing. The gun I'd been carrying for weeks was loaded and tucked into the waistband of my jeans. A knife in my boot, cash in my pocket. Every move felt surreal, like I was an actor in someone else's thriller. By the time I arrived at the coordinates, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the industrial park in a pall of shadows. The building was nondescript, its facade weathered and graffiti-stained. I parked a block away and approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. The entrance was ajar, the faint hum of machinery filtering out. My hand brushed the grip of my gun as I stepped inside. They were waiting for me. A long table dominated the center of the room, flanked by shadowy figures. Their faces were obscured by the dim light, but their presence was suffocating. At the head of the table sat a man in a tailored suit, his eyes gleaming like a predator's. "You made it," he said, his voice smooth, almost warm. "We were beginning to think you'd lost your nerve. Who are you?" My voice was steady, but my grip on the gun tightened. The man leaned back, gesturing to the file I'd placed on the table. "We're the ones cleaning up your mess. Or, rather, the mess you've been dragged into." "I didn't ask for this," I snapped. "I didn't sign up for any of it." "Didn't you?" His smile was chilling. "Think back. Before Rachel. Before Tyler. Before everything fell apart. You made choices, deals, promises. All of this is just the bill coming due." His words hit me like a freight train. Flashes of a past I'd buried clawed their way to the surface. The late nights, the whispered conversations, the deals I'd made in desperation to build a life I could be proud of. I'd been reckless, naive, and now it was all unraveling. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Simple," he said, sliding a new file across the table. "We want you to finish what you started." I opened the file with trembling hands. Inside were names, dates, and plans. An intricate web of corruption that made my head spin. At the center of it all was me. Or, at least, the version of me they needed. "And if I refuse?" The man's smile didn't falter. "Refusal isn't an option. You're either with us or you're gone. Permanently." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. There was no escape, no running. They'd built this labyrinth, and I was trapped at its heart. My only choice was to play their game, and find a way to destroy them from within. The man stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Welcome back," he said, his voice dripping with finality. "We've been waiting for you." As I left the building, the cold night air biting at my skin, one thought consumed me. I'd been betrayed by everyone I'd ever trusted. Now it was my turn to betray them all. The night was suffocatingly quiet as I drove back to the motel, my mind a whirlwind of schemes and shattered trust. I'd been thrust into a game I barely understood, manipulated by shadowy figures who seemed to know more about my past than I did. They'd called it finishing what I started. But all I could feel was the gnawing certainty that their endgame wasn't mine. Back in the motel, I bolted the door and slid the chair under the handle. My hands shook as I placed the new file on the table. It felt heavier than the first, as though the paper itself carried the weight of the lives it detailed. Names, addresses, encrypted accounts, a sprawling network of corruption that somehow all led back to me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a single word. Asterisco decide asterisco. I knew what they wanted. They needed me to act, to carry out their plans under the guise of cleaning up my own mess. But there was no way I'd walk into this blindly. I needed leverage, something that could tip the scales in my favor. The file provided some answers. Among the names were a few I recognized, former colleagues, distant acquaintances, and one name that made my stomach churn. Rachel. Her name wasn't just in the file. It was circled, annotated with cryptic notes and timestamps. She was deeper in this than I'd realized. But why? Had she been playing me all along? Or was she another pawn? I traced the connections late into the night, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. By morning, I had a plan. A reckless, desperate plan, but the only one I could see. If Rachel was involved, she might be my way in, or my way out. Finding her wasn't hard. She hadn't been subtle about her movements since we last spoke. A quick search led me to a high-rise apartment downtown, the kind of place you don't end up in by accident. I waited until nightfall before making my move, slipping into the building behind a distracted delivery driver. The elevator ride felt eternal, the ding of each floor like a countdown to something inevitable. Her door was unlocked. That should have been my first warning. The apartment was eerily silent, the air heavy with the scent of expensive perfume. I stepped inside, my hand instinctively on the grip of my gun. The living room was immaculate, the kind of sterile perfection that screamed decorator rather than home. On the coffee table sat a single envelope with my name scrawled across it. "Took you long enough?" came a voice from behind me. I spun around, gun drawn, to find Rachel leaning against the doorframe of the bedroom. She looked different, colder, sharper. The warmth I'd once known in her eyes was gone, replaced by something unreadable. "Put the gun down," she said, her voice calm, almost amused. "You're not going to shoot me." I didn't lower it. "Start talking," she sighed, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "You really don't get it, do you? You think this is about you? About us? It's so much bigger than that." "Then explain it," I snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you sold me out." Her laugh was bitter. "Sold you out? I've been protecting you, you idiot. Do you have any idea what they'd do if I wasn't in the picture? You wouldn't even be here right now." "Protecting me?" I said, incredulous. "By dragging me into this mess? By keeping you alive?" she shouted, cutting me off. "You think they're giving you a choice? They're not. They never were. The moment you signed that contract, you belong to them. I've been trying to buy you time to keep them from pulling the trigger. But you're making it damn near impossible." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. If she was telling the truth, then everything I thought I knew was a lie. But could I trust her? Could I afford not to? "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," she said. "And because knowing would have put you in even more danger. But now," she gestured to the envelope on the table, "now you're in too deep to pretend anymore." I lowered the gun, my mind racing. "What's in the envelope?" "Your way out," she said. "But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be clean. If you want to survive this, you're going to have to do exactly what I say." I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to walk away, to run and never look back. But deep down, I knew there was no escape. Not from this. "Okay," I said finally. "What do I have to do?" Her eyes softened, just for a moment. "You're going to have to betray them before they betray you. And you're going to need to decide who you can trust." As she spoke, the weight of the envelope in my hand felt heavier than ever. This was it, the point of no return. And for the first time, I realized that the only way out of this game was to rewrite the rules entirely. The next morning, the world seemed darker. as if the clouds above reflected the chaos brewing inside me. Rachel's instructions were written in cryptic shorthand, detailed enough to be dangerous but vague enough to leave me questioning every step. Burn the file. Memorize the addresses and forget you ever saw the rest, she'd said before I left her apartment. But forgetting wasn't an option anymore. I found myself at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where truckers and drifters exchange stories over stale coffee and greasy bacon. The hum of idle chatter and clinking silverware provided an illusion of normalcy I desperately needed. My mind, however, was far from settled. I'd spent hours dissecting Rachel's words, trying to discern the truth from the lies. A voice broke through my thoughts. "You're in deep, aren't you?" I looked up to see an older man in a faded cap, his eyes sharp despite the weathered lines on his face. He'd slid into the booth across from me without an invitation. I tensed, my hand instinctively moving toward the knife hidden under my jacket. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, kid. I'm not here to hurt you, but you've got the look of someone who's about to make a lot of bad decisions. Thought maybe I'd offer some advice." "Do I know you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. He chuckled. "Not yet, but I know a thing or two about the hole you're digging yourself into. Let's just say I've been there." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to shut him out, to walk away. But something about his demeanor, the calm confidence in his voice, made me pause. "What do you want?" "To help," he said simply. "You're caught up in something big, something that's going to chew you up and spit you out if you're not careful. But you don't have to go it alone." I studied him, searching for a hint of deceit. "Why should I trust you?" He leaned back, his gaze steady. "You shouldn't. Trust isn't given. It's earned. But if you're smart, you'll take a lifeline when it's thrown your way." His words hung in the air as I weighed my options. Finally, I nodded. "All right, talk." He smiled, pulling out a small notepad and pen. "First thing you need to know, the people pulling the strings don't just want you to play their game. They want you to become the game. You're a tool to them, nothing more. And the second you're not useful, you're expendable." "Tell me something I don't know," I said dryly. "Fair enough," he said, scribbling something on the notepad before tearing out the page and sliding it across the table. "These are the names of a few people who've been in your position. Some made it out. Most didn't. But the ones who did, they're the ones you'll want to talk to." I glanced at the list. 3 names.
No explanations.
Just names. "And how do I find them?" He smirked. "That's your first test, kid. If you're going to survive this, you'll need to get creative." Before I could press him further, he stood, dropping a few bills on the table. "Good luck. You're going to need it." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers. It took me 2 days to track down the first name on the list, David Mathers. A quick search revealed he'd once been a high-level executive at the same corporation that had dragged me into this mess. Now he was a ghost. No online presence, no address, nothing. But a bit of digging through public records turned up a single lead. A cabin in the woods outside of town, purchased under a shell company linked to his name. The drive out was tense, every mile stretching my nerves thinner. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the dense forest. The place looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and the porch sagging with age. But as I approached, I caught a faint glimmer of light seeping through the cracks. I knocked, my hand hovering near the gun at my side. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the sound of locks clicking and the door creaking open. A man stood in the doorway, his face gaunt and eyes hollow. He looked like he'd aged decades since the last photo I'd seen of him. "David Mathers?" I asked. He eyed me warily. "Who's asking?" "Someone who's in over their head," I said. "I was told you might be able to help." For a long moment he just stared at me. Then, with a resigned sigh, he stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the cabin was sparse. A single room with a cot, a small table, and stacks of papers and files scattered everywhere. He gestured for me to sit, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey before taking a seat across from me. "You've got about 5 minutes before I decide whether to kick you out or put a bullet in your head," he said bluntly. "Start talking." So I did. I told him everything, the files, the messages, Rachel, the meeting at the warehouse. When I finished, he just nodded, his expression unreadable. "You're right," he said finally. "You're in deep, deeper than you realize. And if you're smart, you'll get out now." "How?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "They've got me boxed in. Every move I make, they're 2 steps ahead." He leaned back, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "The only way out is to burn it all down. Their network, their leverage, their trust. Everything. And how do I do that?" He smiled, a grim, humorless smile. "That's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? But if you're serious about surviving, you'll need to start thinking like them. Ruthless, calculated, willing to sacrifice whatever it takes." His words sent a chill down my spine. But as I looked around the cabin, at the remnants of a life destroyed by the same forces now closing in on me, I realized I didn't have a choice. If I was going to make it out, I'd have to become the thing I hated most. And when the time came, I'd make sure they regretted ever pulling me into their game. The night after meeting David Mathers was restless. His warning replayed in my mind like a broken record. Burn it all down. It sounded simple enough, but dismantling a shadowy organization with reach and resources far beyond my comprehension wasn't just a tall order. It was suicidal. But then again, wasn't everything about this situation a death sentence? I stared at the ceiling of my motel room, the faint hum of the vending machines outside lulling me into a state of half-awareness. My hand brushed against the list of names the old man at the diner had given me. 2 more names to chase. 2 more people who might hold answers or lead me further into the abyss. The first name on the list after Mathers was Victoria Kane. A quick search revealed she was once a high-profile investigative journalist who had mysteriously vanished after publishing a damning exposé on corporate corruption 5 years ago. The corporation at the center of her investigation? The very same one now haunting me. Her last known address was in a sleepy coastal town 3 hours away. By dawn, I was on the road, the rising sun painting the horizon in hues of orange and red. It felt almost poetic, like I was chasing the light while the darkness clawed at my heels. Victoria's house was a modest bungalow perched precariously on the edge of a cliff. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below was deafening, drowning out the whispers of doubt in my mind. I knocked on the weathered wooden door, half expecting no one to answer. But someone did. Victoria was nothing like I'd imagined. She was younger, sharper, her eyes piercing as they sized me up. She didn't invite me in. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. "Let me guess," she said, her voice carrying a mix of disdain and weariness. "You're another one of their messengers." "No," I said quickly. "I'm not with them. I'm trying to stop them." She laughed, a bitter sound that carried more pain than humor. "Stop them?" You don't stop them. You survive them. If you're lucky. I met David Mathers, I said, hoping the name would mean something to her. He said you could help. Her expression hardened at the mention of Mathers. David should have known better than to drag someone else into this mess. I'm already in, I said. I just need to know how to get out. Victoria studied me for a long moment before sighing and stepping aside. Come in. But if you're lying, I'll kill you myself. Her home was a blend of chaos and control, every surface covered in papers, photographs, and maps, yet each one meticulously labeled and organized. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed me one before sitting across from me at the small kitchen table. So, she said, lighting another cigarette, tell me everything. I recounted the events of the past few weeks, the emails, the files, Rachel, the cryptic meetings. Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she stubbed out her cigarette and leaned forward. You're in deeper than I thought. They don't usually let people like you get this far. That means you're either very useful to them or very dangerous. What do you mean? The people behind this, they don't just run corporations. They run governments, economies, wars. If they've let you live, it's because you're a piece on their board. And if you want to survive, you need to figure out what kind of piece you are. She pulled out a folder from the pile on the table and slid it toward me. Inside were photos and documents that made my blood run cold. Images of me, Rachel, Tyler. Notes scribbled in the margins detailing our movements, our habits, our vulnerabilities. They'd been watching us long before I'd ever received that first email. How long? I asked, my voice barely audible. Years, Victoria said. They groom people like you. Set you up, knock you down, then pull you into their fold. It's all a game to them. A way to consolidate power. So how do I stop them? Victoria's eyes met mine, a flicker of sympathy breaking through her steely exterior. You can't. Not alone. But there are others out there, people like me, like Mathers. People who've slipped through the cracks. If you can find them, you might stand a chance. And if I can't? She finished her drink in one gulp and stood, gesturing toward the door. Then you run. And you don't stop running. As I left her house, the weight of her words settled over me. The cliffside wind whipped against my face, the ocean below roaring like an angry god. I had 2 choices, fight or flee. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which one terrified me more. The wind howled as I stood by the cliffside, staring out at the vast, angry ocean. Victoria's words echoed in my mind. Fight or flee. It sounded so simple in theory, yet each option carried risks I wasn't ready to face. My fingers traced the edges of the folder she had given me, the weight of its secrets pulling me further into the abyss. I drove back to the motel in silence, the car's headlights carving a path through the darkness. The roads were empty, and for a brief moment, I felt a fleeting sense of peace, as if the world had paused just long enough for me to catch my breath. But I knew better. They were still out there, watching, waiting. Back in the safety of the motel room, I spread the contents of the folder across the bed. Victoria's network of notes, photographs, and connections was vast. But one name stood out among the rest: Simon Drake. He was labeled as a former operative, someone who had been on the inside and had somehow managed to claw his way out. If anyone could help me dismantle this machine, it would be him. The only problem? Simon Drake was in hiding, and his last known location was halfway across the country. The journey to find Drake was grueling. I switched cars 3 times, changed my appearance, and avoided using anything that could leave a digital trail. Paranoia had become second nature, and every stranger's glance felt like a threat. By the time I reached the small, desolate town where Drake was supposedly holed up, exhaustion was etched into my very bones. Drake's home was an abandoned gas station on the edge of the town, its windows boarded up and the sign rusted beyond recognition. The place reeked of decay, but a faint glow from inside suggested someone was there. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" A voice barked from within. It was gruff, cautious, and filled with suspicion. "My name's not important," I said, "but I need your help. Victoria Kane sent me." There was a long pause, then the sound of locks clicking. The door creaked open just enough for me to see a man's face, weathered and shadowed by years of hardship. His eyes were sharp, scanning me for any sign of deceit. "Inside, now," he ordered. The interior of the gas station was as decrepit as the outside, but it had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Maps covered the walls, red strings connecting locations and names in a chaotic web. A laptop hummed softly on a rickety desk, its screen displaying lines of encrypted code. "Victoria must be desperate if she's sending people my way," Drake said, closing the door behind me. "What do you want?" "I want to take them down," I said, my voice firm despite the knot of fear in my stomach. "I want out of this, and I want to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." Drake snorted, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Bold. Stupid but bold. You think you can fight them? They've got resources you can't even imagine. Hell, they probably know you're here right now. Then why are you still alive?" I shot back. "If they're so unstoppable, why haven't they silenced you?" Drake's expression darkened. "Because I know how to disappear, and because I've got leverage." "Leverage?" He hesitated, then gestured to the laptop. "Years of dirt. Emails, transactions, blackmail material. Enough to make a few powerful people very uncomfortable. It's the only reason I'm still breathing." "Then why not use it?" Drake's laugh was hollow. "And do what? Expose them? They'd bury it before it ever saw the light of day. No, the only way to beat them is to make them collapse from within." "How?" Drake leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You hit them where it hurts. Their money, their networks, their trust. You make their own people turn against them. It's not quick, and it's not clean, but it's the only way." He began typing on the laptop, pulling up a series of files. "This is what I've been working on. A roadmap. Weak points in their infrastructure, key players with vulnerabilities. But it's incomplete. That's where you come in." "What do you need me to do?" Drake's eyes locked onto mine. "You're going to infiltrate them. Get close to the ones who matter, earn their trust, and feed me the information I need to bring them down. It's dangerous, and if you slip up even once, they'll kill you. But it's the only chance we've got." My stomach churned at the thought, but I nodded. "I'll do it." Drake's lips curled into a grim smile. "Good. Then let's get to work." The following morning, the gravity of Drake's plan hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just playing a dangerous game. I was stepping into the lion's den, knowing full well I could be devoured. But Drake's confidence was contagious, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like there might be a way out. Drake wasted no time. He handed me a burner phone, a slim device loaded with encrypted communication apps and pre-programmed numbers. "This is your lifeline," he said. No personal calls, no deviations. If you get caught with anything else, you're dead. I nodded, pocketing the phone. What's the first step? Immersion, he said, pulling up a series of profiles on his laptop. The screen flickered with images of powerful figures. CEOs, politicians, and middlemen who acted as the glue holding the organization together. We need to get you close to someone in their inner circle. Someone high enough to have access but low enough to trust an outsider. He clicked on a name, Helena Ward. A striking woman in her early 40s, her bio listed her as the head of an international logistics firm. A fancy way of saying she handled the organization's dirty work. Smuggling, laundering, securing assets. If it moved across borders, Helena made it happen. She's hosting a fundraiser in 2 weeks, Drake said, leaning back in his chair. You'll need to get in, make contact, and gain her trust. But it won't be easy. Security will be tight, and she's not the type to let her guard down. How do I even get close? Drake smirked. You're going to be her savior. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Drake drilled me on everything from conversational tactics to identifying hidden surveillance. He taught me how to blend in, how to observe without drawing attention, and, most importantly, how to lie convincingly. By the time the night of the fundraiser arrived, I hardly recognized myself. I wore a tailored suit, my hair neatly combed, and a new alias. Michael Harrington, a venture capitalist with a penchant for philanthropy. My credentials were flawless, courtesy of Drake's extensive network of forgers. The venue was a sprawling mansion nestled in the hills, its opulence on full display. Guests milled about, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries, while security guards in discreet earpieces patrolled the perimeter. I stepped out of the rented car, my heart pounding as I handed my invitation to the doorman. Mr. Harrington, he said with a polite nod. Welcome. I entered the grand hall, my eyes scanning the crowd for Helena. She wasn't hard to spot. Draped in a sleek black gown, she exuded authority, her every movement commanding attention. She stood near the bar, engaged in conversation with a man who looked equally powerful. Drake's voice echoed in my head. Wait for the moment. Don't force it. That moment came sooner than I expected. As Helena turned to leave the bar, a server carrying a tray of glasses tripped, sending champagne flutes crashing to the floor, and splashing her dress in the process. Gasps rippled through the room as the server stammered apologies. I saw my opening. Grabbing a napkin from a nearby table, I stepped forward, offering it to Helena with an apologetic smile. Let me help you with that. Her eyes narrowed as she assessed me, but she took the napkin. Thank you, she said curtly, dabbing at the stains. The perils of fine dining, I said lightly.
I'm Michael Harrington.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Helena Ward, she replied, her tone still guarded. And what brings you here, Mr. Harrington? Philanthropy, I said, gesturing toward the auction display in the corner. I've always believed in giving back, and I hear your firm does exceptional work in that regard. Her gaze sharpened, a flicker of interest sparking in her eyes. We do what we can. The conversation flowed more easily after that. I complimented her on her achievements, subtly steering the dialogue toward her work without prying too deeply. By the end of the night, I had her card in my pocket and a tentative promise to meet for lunch. Back at the motel, Drake was waiting, his expression unreadable as I recounted the night's events. When I finished, he nodded approvingly. Not bad for your first field test. But this is just the beginning. Getting close is one thing. Staying close is another. Over the next few days, Helena and I exchanged polite emails, arranging a lunch at an upscale restaurant in the city. The meeting was tense at first, her demeanor as calculating as ever. But I played my role well, presenting myself as an ambitious investor looking to expand into logistics. By the end of the meal, I had secured an invitation to tour her firm's operations, a golden opportunity to uncover the organization's secrets. As I left the restaurant, my phone buzzed with a message from Drake. * good work. Keep your eyes open. Trust no one. *. I stared at the screen, the weight of his words sinking in. Trust no one. Not even myself. The morning of the tour at Helena Ward's firm began with a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. The stakes were higher now. Getting this close meant threading a needle through a web of danger, and any misstep could cost me everything. The address she'd given me led to a sleek glass building in the heart of the city. It looked like every other corporate office, harmless, unassuming, but I knew better. This wasn't just a logistics firm. It was a nerve center for the organization's operations, and today I'd be walking straight into it. Helena greeted me in the lobby, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. She wore a tailored navy suit, her demeanor as precise and polished as the environment around her. "Michael," she said with a professional smile, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it. Let's get started." "Looking forward to it," I replied, masking the unease simmering beneath my calm exterior. She led me through a series of security checkpoints, each more stringent than the last. ID scans, fingerprint verification, even a retinal scan at one point. Every layer was a reminder of how deep I was diving into enemy territory. The tour began in a conference room where Helena presented an overview of the firm's operations. She spoke confidently, highlighting the company's efficiency and global reach. I nodded along, feigning interest while my mind raced. This was the surface level, the facade they showed to the world. The real work was happening elsewhere, behind doors I needed to find a way through. As we moved through the building, I took mental notes: security cameras, locked doors, keypads. Helena's assistant, a young man named Peter, trailed behind us, jotting down notes and occasionally chiming in with additional details. His eagerness made him seem harmless, but I couldn't dismiss him entirely. Everyone here was a potential threat. When we reached the warehouse section, my pulse quickened. Rows of containers and crates stretched out like a labyrinth, each one marked with cryptic codes. Workers in uniforms moved methodically, loading and unloading goods under the watchful eyes of supervisors. "This is the heart of our operation," Helena said, gesturing to the bustling activity. "Every shipment is meticulously tracked and monitored. It's what sets us apart from the competition." "Impressive," I said, stepping closer to one of the crates. "What's in these?" "Ah, trade secrets," she replied with a sly smile. "But rest assured, everything we handle is above board." The lie was so smooth, so effortless, that I almost admired her for it. Almost. As we continued, I spotted an opportunity. One of the workers was struggling with a crate, his supervisor nowhere in sight. I stepped in, offering to help. Helena raised an eyebrow but didn't object. As I lifted the crate, I subtly glanced at the label, a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to me but could mean everything to Drake. By the time the tour ended, I had memorized as much as I could. Key locations, personnel, codes. Helena seemed pleased with my interest and invited me to a private dinner later that week to discuss potential investments. I accepted, knowing it would bring me closer to the answers I needed. Back at the motel, I relayed everything to Drake over an encrypted call. He listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions. "You did good," he said when I finished. "But we need more. Those codes you saw? They're shipping manifests. If we can crack them, we'll know exactly what they're moving and where." "And how do we do that?" "You'll need access to their mainframe," he said. "It's risky, but if you can plant this." He held up a small USB drive, its black casing unassuming. "We'll have everything we need." I hesitated, the weight of the task pressing down on me. "And if I get caught?" Drake's expression darkened. "You won't. Just don't screw up." The dinner with Helena was at an exclusive rooftop restaurant, the kind of place where power brokers made deals over overpriced wine. She was charming, disarming even, but I couldn't let my guard down. Over the course of the meal, she revealed more about the organization, though always carefully, never enough to incriminate herself. When dessert arrived, she leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Michael, I like you. You're ambitious, intelligent. The kind of person we need on our team. Have you considered taking on a more active role in our operations?" My heart raced, but I forced a calm smile. "I'd be open to it. What did you have in mind?" She smiled, leaning back. "Let's discuss it further at the office. There's someone I'd like you to meet." The trap was set, but whose trap it was remained to be seen. As I left the restaurant that night, the USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than ever. The next step would be the most dangerous yet, and there was no turning back now. The office was a fortress, a seamless blend of modern architecture and cutting-edge security. As Helena escorted me through the main lobby, her demeanor was as polished as ever, but something about the way her gaze lingered on me felt different. Calculating, testing. "Before we head to the meeting," she said, her tone casual but firm, "I'd like to show you something." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Lead the way." We took the elevator to a floor I hadn't seen during the tour, the button marked only with a single, unassuming R. The ride was silent except for the faint hum of machinery. My mind raced with possibilities. What was she planning? Had she seen through my act? When the doors opened, the atmosphere shifted. The floor was stark, almost clinical, a sharp contrast to the sleek elegance of the rest of the building. Rows of servers lined one wall, their blinking lights casting eerie shadows. On the opposite side, glass-walled rooms housed desks cluttered with monitors displaying live feeds, graphs, and data streams. "This is our operations center," Helena said, her voice tinged with pride. "Everything we do flows through here. It's the brain of our entire network." I forced a look of awe. "Impressive. I can see why you're so successful." She smiled faintly but didn't reply. Instead, she led me to one of the glass-walled rooms, where a man in a crisp suit was waiting. His presence was commanding, his sharp features and piercing eyes exuding authority. "Michael Harrington, meet Adrian Cole," Helena said. "He oversees our security operations." Adrian extended a hand, his grip firm and unyielding. "A pleasure. Helena speaks highly of you." "Likewise," I said, matching his tone. The exchange was brief, but Adrian's scrutinizing gaze lingered as Helena guided me back to the main floor. She gestured to a console manned by a team of analysts, their eyes glued to the monitors. "This is where the magic happens," she said. "Every transaction, every shipment, every connection. It's all monitored here." As she spoke, my focus sharpened. This was the mainframe Drake needed access to, the core of their operations. But with Adrian watching my every move and security tighter than ever, planting the USB drive would be nearly impossible. Nearly. Later that evening, I met with Drake in a secluded corner of a parking garage. His expression was grim as I relayed everything I'd seen. "They're watching me closely," I said. "Helena's suspicious, and Adrian. He's something else entirely." Drake nodded, his jaw tight. "It was always going to be risky, but this changes things. If Adrian's involved, we need to move faster." "How?" Drake handed me a modified version of the USB drive. "This one's got a delay function. Plant it during your next visit. It'll activate after you've left, giving us time to retrieve the data without alerting them immediately." I stared at the drive, its small size belying the danger it represented. "And if they find it, then we're both dead," Drake said bluntly. "But if you don't plant it, we're already finished." I nodded, slipping the drive into my pocket. "When's the next move?" "Helena's meeting," Drake said. "They'll be distracted, focused on their agenda. That's when you strike." The day of the meeting arrived with an air of tension so thick it felt suffocating. Helena had arranged for me to sit in on the discussion, framing it as an opportunity to familiarize myself with the organization's inner workings. The conference room was sleek and imposing, its long table surrounded by powerful figures whose faces I recognized from Drake's files. Adrian was there, his presence a constant reminder of the precariousness of my position. As Helena led the discussion, outlining strategies and plans, I seized the moment. Under the guise of retrieving a document from my briefcase, I slipped the USB drive into a port on the console by my seat. The device clicked softly, and a small green light blinked, a signal that the upload had begun. I forced myself to focus on the meeting, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of the risk pressing down on me. When the meeting finally ended, Helena approached, her expression unreadable. "Michael, a moment?" she said. I followed her into a private office, my pulse quickening. She closed the door behind us and turned to face me, her eyes sharp. "You're impressive," she said, her tone measured. "Ambitious, intelligent, adaptable. But I have to ask, why are you here?" I hesitated, carefully crafting my response. "Because I see an opportunity to be part of something bigger, to make an impact." Her gaze lingered, searching for cracks in my facade. Then she smiled. "Good answer. But know this: trust is earned here, not given. Don't let me regret bringing you in." "I won't," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. As I left her office, the USB drive's green light was still blinking in my mind. The clock was ticking, and with every passing moment, the walls of this game closed in tighter. One wrong move and it would all come crashing down. The hours following the meeting felt like a blur, but the tension was suffocatingly real. As the USB drive quietly performed its task within the organization's mainframe, I knew my every move was under a microscope. Helena's parting words repeated in my mind. "Trust is earned here, not given." But trust worked both ways, and mine was rapidly evaporating. That evening, I found myself in a dimly lit bar across town, the kind of place where anonymity thrived. Drake sat in a secluded booth at the back, nursing a drink while keeping his eyes on the entrance. I slid into the seat across from him, exhaustion etched into every movement. "It's done," I said, keeping my voice low. "The drive is in." Drake's expression didn't shift, but a flicker of relief crossed his eyes. Good. We'll know soon enough if it worked. You'll need to keep your head down until then. That's not going to be easy, I replied. Helena's watching me, and Adrian, he's too sharp. He'll figure it out if we're not careful. Drake leaned forward, his tone steely. Then don't give him a reason to suspect you. Play their game until the moment we're ready to flip the board. I nodded, but the weight of his words settled heavily on my chest. The idea of walking back into that office, of continuing to deceive people who were already suspicious, felt like stepping into a minefield. The next morning, I returned to the office, my every movement calculated and deliberate. Helena greeted me with her usual professionalism, but there was an edge to her demeanor that hadn't been there before. "Michael," she said as she approached, "Adrian wants to see you. He's in the operations center." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Of course, I'll head there now." The walk to the operations center felt endless, the air growing heavier with each step. When I entered, Adrian was standing near one of the consoles, his back to me. He turned as I approached, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. "Michael," he said, his tone unreadable. "We've been reviewing some irregularities in the system. I'm sure you understand why that's concerning." My pulse quickened, but I forced a calm demeanor. "Irregularities? I'm not sure I follow." Adrian stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "We've detected unauthorized access to our mainframe. Minor but persistent. Almost as if someone is testing the system's vulnerabilities." "That's troubling," I said carefully. "Do you have any idea who might be responsible?" He didn't reply immediately, instead studying me as if searching for cracks in my facade. Finally, he said, "Not yet, but we will. Security is already tightening, and anyone who steps out of line will be dealt with." The threat was clear, but I nodded, feigning agreement. "Let me know if there's anything I can do to assist." Adrian's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "I'll keep that in mind." That night, back at the motel, I relayed the encounter to Drake over another encrypted call. "They're on to us," I said. "Adrian's already tightening security. It's only a matter of time before they trace the breach to me." Drake's voice was calm but firm. "We're closer than ever. The data's uploading as we speak. We just need a little more time. And if we don't get it, then we'll improvise," he said. "But for now, hold your ground. You're the only one who can keep this from falling apart." I ended the call, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a vice. Sleep was impossible, my mind racing with contingency plans and worst-case scenarios. The following day, Helena called me into her office. She sat behind her desk, her expression inscrutable as she gestured for me to take a seat. "Michael," she began, "I've been impressed with your work so far, but I need to ask, are you fully committed to this organization?" The question caught me off guard, but I recovered quickly. "Of course. Why do you ask?" "Because we can't afford divided loyalties," she said, leaning forward. "If there's anything you need to tell me, now is the time." The room felt suffocating, her gaze boring into me like a drill. I forced a confident smile. "I have nothing to hide, Helena. I'm here to contribute, nothing more." She studied me for a long moment before leaning back in her chair. "Good, because trust is everything in this business. And those who betray it, well, they don't last long." Her words hung in the air like a guillotine, but I nodded, maintaining my composure. "Understood." As I left her office, my mind raced. The walls were closing in, and every move felt like a step closer to disaster. But the data was almost in Drake's hands, and with it, the power to bring this entire operation crashing down. All I had to do was survive a little longer. The final act came sooner than expected. Late that night, Drake called me. "We've got the data," he said, urgency lacing his words. "Everything. Account details, transaction records, blackmail material. Enough to destroy them. But there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" "They're on to us. Adrian's crew has traced the breach. They'll come for you first. You need to get out now." Panic surged through me, but I pushed it down. "Where do I go?" "I've set up an extraction point," Drake said. "An old warehouse on the east side. Be there in an hour. And Michael, don't bring your phone. They'll track it." I grabbed the essentials, a burner phone, the pistol I'd stashed away, and cash. Leaving the motel, I felt the eyes of the city on me, every shadow a potential threat. The drive to the warehouse was a blur, adrenaline keeping me sharp as I scanned for tails. When I arrived, Drake was waiting, his face grim. "We don't have much time. Once the data goes public, they'll be too busy putting out fires to chase us. But until then, we're targets." "What's the plan?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Drake handed me a plane ticket. "Disappear. New name, new life. They won't stop hunting you, but if you're smart, you'll stay ahead." "What about you?" "I've got my own escape route," he said. "Don't worry about me. Just go." I hesitated, the weight of everything we'd done pressing down on me. Then I nodded. "Good luck, Drake." "You too," he said, clasping my hand. "And Michael, don't look back." I didn't. 3 days later, I sat in a crowded airport terminal halfway across the world, the hum of voices and the scent of jet fuel grounding me in my new reality. The headlines were already spreading. Massive corporate corruption exposed. Arrests underway. Helena's face was among them, her empire crumbling as the world watched. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt nothing. Just the hollow ache of someone who had lost everything to win a battle they never wanted to fight. As my